Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
There is a cubicle at WellMed Medical Management in San Antonio, Texas. It is a cubicle that today sits empty, except for a small memorial of framed photographs and fresh flowers placed there. This cubicle was the workspace for Jennifer Smith, a 46-year-old mother of 3. On Monday of this week, as Jennifer and her husband were nearing the end of their marriage, despite counseling, and just a few weeks after she had filed for divorce from her husband, Jennifer was murdered in her own home by the man she was divorcing. Scott Smith was known in atheist circles as co-host of the Recovering from Religion podcast. On the morning of Monday, November 27th, 2017, he suddenly canceled a lunch date with a friend. He left a one-word message on his Facebook page. It was the word goodbye. Police reported an emergency call from his house just before 11 o'clock in the morning, where reports say he said he was going to kill Jennifer, and then he was going to turn the gun on himself. When the police arrived, they heard 2 gunshots. The authorities found both bodies upstairs in the home. Now, Jennifer's funeral is tomorrow. Her life horribly taken from her by a killer, and her 3 young children left in the aftermath, who must now somehow try to put the broken pieces back together into some kind of life, some kind of future. There are fundraising efforts going on right now for these girls. There is a link in the description box of this podcast with my encouragement to you to give something, give anything, to at least help mitigate the financial challenges that these girls now face. At least let's pull the financial obstacles from in front of them so they can deal with all the other stuff, as they deal with the unthinkable loss of their mother at the hands of their father. The link to give is gofundme.com/helpthesmithgirls. And as you click that link to donate, I'm going to have 3 separate conversations right here on this broadcast. The first is going to be with Aaron Smith, the son of Scott Smith. He wanted to be a part of this conversation. He wanted to participate as part of a support effort for the girls. Secondly, I'm going to talk to a panel of people who were wired in San Antonio. They knew the couple, and they're going to talk with me about the situation before and after this Monday's murder. And then finally, I'm going to talk to a mental health professional. His name is Dr. Hector Garcia. He lives in San Antonio. He's a clinical psychologist. He's going to talk with us about the tragedy. He's going to talk with us about the larger issue of domestic violence, how we in the secular, free-thought, atheist communities can deal with the hard fact that, an atheist podcast host, known in certain circles in atheist activism, could carry out such a terrible act of violence against his own wife. Now, there is no easy way to have these discussions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of criticism by people who say we're doing it wrong. It's too soon. Or that nothing good can come from talking at all about, our questions about things like motive and history and potential warning signs and those types of things. And I just disagree. I think we can talk about these things. I think we must talk about these things. Even when the answers don't reveal themselves, I think the search for answers has merit. I think the hard and specific questions about this crime have merit. I think the pursuit of understanding so we might prevent something like this from happening tomorrow, that has merit. Speaking about Jennifer Smith as a fellow human being that we lost, that has merit. And of course, our larger mission today of raising money for the orphaned daughters certainly has merit. Now, this broadcast is not a sensationalistic one, and we're just going to talk like real people. And while you and I are navigating these feelings of confusion and pain and anger and sadness in the wake of Monday's events and the murder of Jennifer Smith, it is my hope that we might be able to speak to each other and listen to each other and be generous with one another and reach out to one another. And as we so often find ourselves doing in the midst of our grief, coming together as human beings, as humanists, to promote the goodness that we so desperately want to see in this world. The webpage to donate again is gofundme.com/help the Smith girls. And let's begin. I have here on the line Aaron Smith, who is the eldest son of the late Scott Smith. Aaron, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us for the conversation.
You're welcome.
First of all, let me ask you, how are you doing?
I'm doing better now that I know that my sisters are in good hands. That was my biggest worry when I found out about the situation, was what they were going through.
May I ask how you found out?
I found out through my father's Facebook. He posted a goodbye status, and it was in the middle of the day. Immediately, I thought that something was up, and I clicked on the comments and rolled through it, and found a news article.
It's okay.
That had said that there was 2 shotgun shots and then silence. And then I watched a video of one of the neighbors. Anthony had posted a video of a police officer in front of my father's and Jennifer's house with a news camera outside as also.
Anthony Magnabosco, of course, of Street Epistemology, who has been, he's a friend of mine, and he's the one who sort of coordinated much of this, and I certainly appreciate him.
I do too, yeah.
Did you see any warning signs? Did your father exhibit any behavior that, in retrospect, might have been telling, might have been something that we could have picked up on had we been looking more clearly?
As far as my perspective, I didn't see any warning signs that any of this would have happened. I did suspect that he may have been suicidal. Leading up to this, he had called me and told me that Jennifer and him were in the process of getting a divorce, and I could tell in his voice that he was very sad about the whole situation, and I tried to support him as much as I could, but we both have many miles apart from each other, so it was very difficult to see him in person.
Aaron, I have to ask, is there a history of violence in that relationship?
No, never. Mm-mm. As far as I know, there wasn't any violent tendencies for my father at all. It was really out of character for him.
You are how old, Aaron?
I'm 27.
Were you and your father close at all at any point?
Growing up, we talked over the phone, and I would see him for 2 weeks out of the year.
So your parents had divorced and your mother had primary custody.
That's correct.
After you graduated from high school, you guys didn't even live in the same state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you didn't have the day-to-day pulse on kind of where he was, what he was doing, who he was with, those types of things.
That's correct. Basically, we usually talk over holidays or birthdays whenever we would call each other.
Have you had any contact with the daughters, the 3 daughters?
I have. I was trying to get in touch with them the day it happened, but I wasn't able to. And finally, I got in touch with the grandparents through Facebook. Somebody had let them know that I was trying to get in touch with my sisters and gave them my information. And I was lucky enough to talk to my sisters and make sure that they were doing okay.
I know that we are putting together, as we speak, efforts to try to help these girls, and you are an active part of that, correct?
That's correct. I'm really just trying to do whatever I can for them at this moment so that they're taken care of later on down the road. I know no money can make things go back to the way they were, but I hope that can help them once they actually want to go to college and their well-being as they do grow up.
Did you know Jennifer at all? I know you were removed from the inner circle.
I did know Jennifer. They got married, I believe it was when I was 9 years old. I was my father's best man in the wedding, and she was one of the kindest people that I've ever met, very caring. She would always check in on me, whether it was just calling me or messaging me through Facebook. And she always sent me care packages. And the last year, she was the one that reached out to me and kind of encouraged my father to also do the same thing.
So you were estranged for a while, you and your father?
Yes, sir. About 3 years.
So Jennifer became kind of the bridge between the two of you to allow you to open the lines of communication and start talking and pursue some reconciliation and healing between you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was very thankful for her going out of her way to do that too.
And at no point you didn't catch anything from her that there were indications she felt in trouble or in danger or that the relationship was volatile or unstable. No red flags for you.
No. Once they had decided to go their separate ways for the divorce, I hadn't really talked to her. It was kind of a sticky situation.
You kept a bit of a distance as things started to get complicated.
Yeah, I think we both did without even really talking to each other about it.
Aaron, is there anything we can do for you? You know, you are a member of the family who is front and center, who is in the midst of this terrible crisis. And while we talk a lot about the daughters, we don't want to forget you. Is there anything that we can be doing for you, my friend?
Honestly, whatever you can do for my sisters is the biggest deal for me. That's the most important thing. They really need all the help they can get. I can't imagine being their age and this happening. And for them to have to go through so many, having to go through the being passed off so many times that day and finding out this information breaks my heart. And I really want as much as I can to help them. And that's the biggest thing for me.
Well, Aaron, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I know there are thousands upon thousands of other people who feel the same and who stand with you and by you in a very dark moment. And I want to thank you for speaking for just a few moments with us. This broadcast and our efforts are dedicated to the very thing you mentioned, helping out your sisters, to trying to bring something out of this tremendous tragedy and to try to, help provide a future that may otherwise have been robbed from them. So in the meantime, my friend, you have my direct contact information. This community stands ready to assist. And if there is anything we can do, we're right here for you. Okay?
I appreciate all the support.
Mentioning the donate link again for the girls, it's gofundme.com/help the Smith girls. I have 4 very special guests who are joining me for kind of a panel conversation, a very candid dialogue about the tragic events of late. And so I want to introduce each of them very quickly. I've got Emily Karp, who was a co-host with Scott of Recovering from Religion. I've got Jason Torpy, who knew Scott. Jason is with the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers. I've got Angela Russell, who is a friend of Jennifer and her whole family, and then Deb Beenan, who is a physician. She's also an officer for one of the secular groups in San Antonio. She's been a friend of mine for a great many years. All four join us on the radio, and I'm glad all of you are here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Emily, let's start with you. Can I get sort of some background? You were co-hosts of Recovering from Religion. You want to start there and sort of take me wherever that leads?
Yeah, I met Scott when he started volunteering with Recovering from Religion and our hotline, and around September, I think it was, 2015. So I've known him a little over 2 years, and we started the podcast around April 2016. And we've been working on the podcast pretty consistently until a month and a half ago or so.
What happened then?
He quit suddenly. Around October 18th, Scott was definitely still messaging me plans like, should we include this listener story in the show, like exactly like this? And then it seemed like October 20th must have been his wedding anniversary, as I found out a week later. But all I knew on October 21st was that something had happened and changed in his life, and he just suddenly said personal reasons he needed to quit the podcast, and he was really sorry that it was so sudden. And, you know, I texted him later that week and was asking him for like a password, and he gave it to me, and he was still like around, but it was a little weird. And then a week later, like about the next weekend, he was like, I feel like I owe you an explanation. And he explained that on their wedding anniversary that Friday, Jennifer had told him she wanted out of the marriage, basically, and they started counseling that week in between when I talked to him the previous time. But he was 95% sure it was going to end in divorce.
Anyone else want to say anything at this point?
This is Jason. You know, I'm a little bit more on the outside. I think a lot of the other people are there in the community and work with Scott a lot. You know, I'm part of the national community because he was visible, and I think it's, you know, important to see that, you know, somebody that we all, you know, even if it was infrequent interactions, we saw somebody who was very active in our community that was capable of killing themselves. And it's, I think, an important opportunity for us to have a lot of introspection about the relationships we have and the support. It may be the case, as far as I can see, it was the case that he had a lot of interaction, a lot of support, and a lot of people around him, even up to the end. And yet this still happened. But it's an opportunity to learn, you know, while we mourn as well, for Jennifer in particular.
Deb, you shared an article with me earlier that I found compelling that spoke to removing the aspect of fame and or notoriety, whether it was sought or not, from murderers. Do you want to speak to that at all, the article itself, what it said, and your thoughts on it?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So I've noticed as mass murders have happened more recently that oftentimes the newscasters will go out of their way to explain that they're not going to report the person's name, that they're going to call him the shooter, the gunman, the murderer, the killer, to try to decrease the notoriety that person is going to gain postmortem through their act. And they do that because they don't want the focus to be on the perpetrator. They want the focus to be on the victims. They want the focus to be on everybody's ability to work through this and figure out how can we prevent this? What does this mean for us? Kind of what Jason was saying. And more importantly, to not make this a positive thing to do, so that down the line, people don't copy the crime to try to get themselves the notoriety that they think can come from it.
It gets a little complicated when we're trying to speak about the act and the action and the potential motives behind the act and action, but we're not giving notoriety to the killer.
This is something that, you know, I watch the news. I see all the deaths that happen and all the crimes, and I get frustrated. I mean, you and I are Facebook friends. You know, I get frustrated. I probably talk about it a lot. But there's also a disconnect that unfortunately isn't there for me with this case, because I was friends with Jen, but more importantly, I was good friends with her killer. And from the moment I found out on Monday, in fact, I found out minutes before getting on a plane to come home from the East Coast, I started racking my brain trying to go through everything that's happened the last couple of weeks, knowing what I knew about their personal situation. Did I see any red flags? Was there a way that I could have intervened? And while I'm going through this, I'm also paying attention to my going through this and realizing that I'm grasping for answers that aren't going to come. And then I started talking to other friends and hearing the questions that they're asking, hearing the questions that friends are asking of them. And I think we're all kind of doing that. And I would say the last day and a half, I've let go of the need to try to find the motive, the need to try to find that red flag, because I don't think that it's going to come in this case.
Angela, can you tell me about Jennifer? I mean, paint me a picture.
I'd love to talk about Jennifer. Jennifer is easy to talk about. Jennifer was a very easy friend. Jennifer was an easy friend to anyone, and she was just so kind to be around. And it's funny that I think sometimes when people die, we kind of glorify them or talk about them in all kind words. But like when I think of Jennifer, this is exactly how I described her when she was still living. She was just, and I connected with Jennifer very easily because she has 3 young daughters. I have 2 young daughters. So we had an easy connection that way. But she was one of those moms who she worked full time, but did so much for her kids and always questioned that she wasn't doing enough for her kids. And she always wanted to be more and do more. But that was just the kind of sign of the good mother that she was. All mothers feel that way and just feel like they just can't do enough by their family. And she just always wanted everyone to feel comfortable. And she went above and beyond in finding out what people liked, what people didn't like, where people might want to be versus not want to be. And she was just very welcoming. She welcomed many families into her home on a regular basis, just so we would have a place to meet and share community. And she was just very generous with everything, with her time, with her money, with her home, with her love. And she just was always giving. And I think that's just what makes this so hard for me, is knowing what kind of mother she was and knowing because of what happened on Monday, she's not here anymore. I mean, that was obviously the first thing for me as her friend, and just a friend to her and a mother to mother friend with her is just what's going to happen to these girls. And that was just what was so striking. I mean, you just know that's going to it's never going to be able to be fixed. It's something that's going to burden them forever. I mean, it's in many, many ways, they're going to go to new schools and to colleges and have new relationships. And the question's always going to pop up, about their family or their parents or their mom or their dad. And so I worry about that. I worry about the burden that's going to be on these girls. And that, I think the question that popped into my head and probably so many people's head is like, what can we do for these girls? And it's just the heartbreaking realization was just like nothing. Like, I know, yes, we can do some things. We can show our love in any way that we can. We can give financially. We can give with notes or care packages or, make them feel our love, but we can't make them feel Jennifer's love anymore, and that's just something that can't change. That's been something that's been broken. So it's hard. It's hard to know there's no substitute for her, and if anything is going to be second rate to her. It's very heartbreaking.
Angela, the question that comes up, and, I feel like I have to ask it, again, but did you catch any echoes that she felt in danger? Did you feel like at any point she was trying to communicate, hey, I may be in trouble?
No, I mean, not to me. I mean, to be honest, we never really, our focus and our conversations were always mostly on our girls. I mean, to be honest, we never, but no, I mean, I never pointedly asked her. I never really felt any reason to pointedly ask her. I mean, I was around their family, and Scott, all of them and the girls, many times. And I never felt, wow, this is making me feel very uncomfortable. it's a kind of embarrassing after the fact. Maybe I should have, but no, I mean, I really just don't. I don't see it. I mean,
I understand you didn't see at the time a reason to address it because you didn't know that there was anything to address. And who knows? I'm not saying there was or wasn't, but it's a question that continues to come up from time to time. I mean, people are like, these usually aren't just isolated incidents. They usually have some precursors, some things that happened before. Jason Torpy, one of the other things I've been hearing quite a bit is those who are saying it was post-traumatic stress disorder, right? He was military, he was traumatized or may have been traumatized and therefore damaged, and that may have driven him. Do you want to speak to that? I know with the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers, you can speak to the military with some authority. What's your perspective?
Yeah, it's and I'm sure Debbie can as well, working, because she does work in a hospital, and I have deep respect. PTSD isn't about, very acute things. It's not about having an issue that, where people blow up. It can affect people over long periods of time. So it's certainly plausible. But from everybody that I've talked to, he, didn't show any signs of that. There were people very close to him providing very good support through this whole period, even, up to the end. I know they knew about the divorce. They knew there were issues there. They were engaged with him, and nothing from what they perceived, I haven't heard any communication that this was PTSD from actual events there, only circumstantially that he had, had some post-traumatic stress from his time in the military, but nothing that would necessarily tie it there. From what I looked at, and this was just my initial reaction, was to dig in and try to see, to look at a Facebook history. His last post, or his last two posts technically, were to change his cover photo to a little girl blowing planets, and to change his photo to what looked at the time to be just a wave goodbye thing, but it was a wave goodbye if you look at it now in retrospect. And he didn't post anything for over a month on Facebook. And that was the 21st of October when he, apparently the following day after he was told about the divorce. And that's something that who knows? Nobody could have done anything, in retrospect necessarily, but that's a red flag that we might learn from. If somebody, has a post like that and is off Facebook for a long period of time, a lot of people noticed, he was off there. A lot of people take Facebook breaks, but, in this case, it may have been something that spoke a little bit more,
and of course,
more to people.
This is Emily, and the way he quit the podcast, it definitely concerned me greatly because the podcast was a huge part of his life. And when he told me why he did it, I knew he was going to regret it. And he did ask to come back to the podcast later. But he told me that he was at the lowest point in his life. He told me he was dreading every task every day. He was dreading Christmas. I asked if he was dreading Thanksgiving. He said, that was when he said he was dreading every task every day. And I tried really hard to be sympathetic and encourage him to power through and hang in there. And, he said he knew things would get worse before they got better. But I could tell, and he also told me unprompted, we kind of had been talking about the fact that I knew someone in my family who died by suicide, that I'm going to spend Thanksgiving with their family and stuff. He knows about that part of my life, but he then brought up that he wasn't suicidal, and that was in the last conversation we ever had. He also had told me he was struggling with drinking too much these past few years, and he thinks that's part of why Jennifer might have wanted to end the marriage. And he stopped drinking as soon as she told him, and he hadn't had a drink for 2 weeks. But I don't know what happened after that. It's not like I can see him in person. I live on the other side of the country. I can't really be that kind of friend to him.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot. I feel like you're, being a little hard on yourself. So, Please take this. I feel like, you did everything you could possibly have done. And one thing that seems very clear to me is he had people all around him. And people that were concerned. And so did
Jennifer. I don't think anyone did anything wrong in terms of not asking Jennifer if she was having problems with Scott. I don't think there were. I really strongly suspect it was not really like a pattern of abuse in this case. So it wasn't really that kind of a situation. Exactly. Like, it was something a little more complicated.
I agree. And I will tell you that he had one, maybe two therapists. He had a marriage counselor. He had a ton of friends. She had a ton of friends. Not one person of all the people that knew them, and they were very connected, not one person has come out and said, "Oh, I'm not surprised." Right?
Yeah.
Everyone is in shock.
You know, I think his birthday was the 20th also, maybe the same as his anniversary. And I don't know, maybe this is not a big deal, but 300 people wished him happy birthday. 300.
Yeah, I think he did feel really alone since a lot of those people don't really know him, probably. It is weird.
And I can understand that.
But yeah, I mean, I think sometimes maybe he friended a ton of people on Facebook, but I don't know how many close friends he had.
He kind of kept himself that way because we invited him out every weekend from the day he said that he was getting divorced to just try to get him out and away. And there was always, "Oh, I'm going to be with the kids. Oh, I got to do this." So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of people saying, "I wish I had done better. I could have done better." There, that guilt. I don't see how anybody could have done. I mean, no one person did everything. But he had everything around him that he could need and use to keep this from happening, and he still made a choice.
Deb, Jason had mentioned you might want to speak to the PTSD angle.
I do. So, no doubt what people have been describing, those who interacted with him, it sounds like depression, and he and I spoke about that, and I won't get too much into that conversation. But absolutely, depression, substance abuse, psychiatric illnesses do increase your risk for the events that happen. However, PTSD in and of itself does not. And one of the issues that I've had on social media and in talking to friends, just seeing how many people have just placed PTSD as the cause. The real concern is that by just falling on that as the cause, it does a disservice to the actual events, to the victims, and it also increases or perpetuates the stigma that those who have PTSD have to live with.
I agree with everything Debbie's saying about PTSD. It may have played a role, but I don't think that's the lesson to be learned here, and it may, go too far to do a disservice to, actual PTSD problems by misrepresenting it or waving this away. And I think it may be a case in certain cases, people are trying to find a way to reconcile what is really an inexplicable action by someone we know, who's a killer and a suicide now. It's just impossible to reconcile in a lot of cases, but there may be other lessons to be learned here. And I think that's important. And the second thing is just, we've talked a lot about the killer. Jennifer is the victim, and maybe Scott is in a certain way, but Jennifer's the real victim, and her children as well. And there's a son involved too. The killer had a son as well. And I think we've done a lot of good. There's a fundraiser out. I assume that you're going to plug that fundraiser to help those children out. And
Absolutely.
I hope that as we kind of work through our feelings and more in the adult friends that we lost, we can continue to focus on helping their children out.
If it's okay, this is Deb again. I guess my motivation for coming on the panel was really to reach out to folks who are suffering like me, as a friend of a killer and of somebody who can't believe that something so horrible could happen so close. I just wanted to kind of talk really quickly about coping skills for this, because it does affect people. I've had friends who tell me their friends who only know the family through Facebook feel as though the tragedy was way too close for them. They feel uncomfortable with how sad they feel or all the questions that it brings up. And I would just remind your listeners to stay connected, because these events do affect us. And there's been quite a few of them, unfortunately, seem more and more frequent. And to keep talking to your friends, get a support system, do the things that make you happy. Think it through, take time to mourn Jennifer and feel for her kids and be angry and go through your emotions with the person that did this. but also to kind of grant yourself time to just enjoy life, because that's really what this says, is that, who knows? We don't know when our last day is going to be, and we don't know what's in store. So just enjoy what you have.
Do you ever encounter those who experience that survivor's guilt? They lose someone precious, and if they one day find the opportunity for happiness, they feel guilty. They feel like they're cheating. Why do I deserve happiness when someone else was denied that chance? You've encountered that, Deb?
Absolutely. I mean, there's survivor's guilt. There's the guilt that we feel as friends. Like I keep hearing it even on this conversation over and over. What could I have seen? How could I have caught this? How could I have intervened? Maybe someone out there listening to this is suicidal, or maybe someone out there worries that they could do this to someone, right? So we hear it, it brings up emotion. I think that's why we need to stay connected. And even if that means professional help, someone to talk to, whatever you do, don't isolate.
Angela, did you want to weigh in on anything you've just heard?
I think that my focus always just goes back to the girls. And it's funny, I've been worrying like you were talking about survivor's guilt. And I worry that, here are these girls, I feel like they're going to feel bad. They maybe ever, hated their mother inside, or, they're so angry at her, and that they're going to feel so, guilty forever thinking those thoughts or feeling those thoughts.
What are the ages of the girls then?
So they're 9, 11, and 14.
I mean, what are they like? We talked about Jennifer, the daughters.
We mostly, when we would be with a family, we were there with our family, and then oftentimes other families were also present, and so we got to see the girls a lot, and especially the 14-year-old was one of the older children, because we would have, my girls were much younger at the time, and they were just all very nurturing, very sweet, always kind. And I'm not just saying that because we're in this current situation. They always were. They were fun to be around. We did, community volunteer projects with them. They were just silly and funny and smart and generally very happy and involved. That's, it's involved with their school, involved with their friends. And that's the thing too. You worry that some of that is going to be robbed from them, some of their joy. I mean, obviously it has been, but they're great girls. They're great girls, just like their mama.
Someone had framed it in such a sobering way. They said, when the girls went to school that morning, they had both parents. And while we can't undo the past, we can do what we can do. There is a fundraiser in place to raise money for just resources for these girls, resources that they are almost certainly going to desperately need. Can I get any one of you or all of you to kind of give a pitch, for my listeners? I've got a link in the description box of the show, but, let's try to rally everyone together and try to do something positive amidst all of this darkness.
Well, this is Angela, and I know this family, these girls, would be so appreciative of your generosity. Like I said before, they have been delivered this burden that they're going to carry with them their whole entire lives. And so if one small part of the burden that we can help remove is financial worry and give them a little more stability, both now and for their futures, that I think would just be a small part of the burden lifted, and they could hopefully just more easily carry on with this hard road they're going to have to go along.
Emily, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, it was so weird for me, having never gotten a chance to meet Jennifer or the children. I heard about them through, Scott, and I felt so much for them anyway. I really wish I had a chance to meet Jennifer. I really wish this had never happened, and I definitely think the emotional trauma of all of this for the girls is going to be so much. If there's anything at all we can do to make it so they don't have practical concerns in addition, I definitely am donating to the fundraiser, and I want all of my family to donate to the fundraiser because, of how I knew the family, and I've been trying to promote it as much as I can because I really think it's an important cause.
Jason Torping?
Yeah, it's very important. I have a couple of hotlines I'd like to share because mental health is important. VA mental health hotline. It's 800 273-8255. There's a couple of numbers here that I think, if you can share in the show notes.
Sure.
Because it's not just a danger to themselves. Obviously, somebody having a mental health episode or making bad decisions for whatever reason can be a danger to others. Those resources are available. There's a lot more than you think there are.
Did you say there was another number or just the one?
There's a non-emergency hotline that's 855-948-2311.
I'll make sure that those numbers are included in the description box of this broadcast. Deb Beenan, any final thoughts?
Just please consider donating, if you can, what you can, to these girls. Their world has been destroyed as they know it, and they're just so sweet. I don't know what else to say.
It has been a very difficult time. I must say that you inspire me. You demonstrate good for goodness sake, a desire to reach out, to help, to heal, to provide community and support, to try to bring something out of the ashes, to help protect other people so that this does not happen again, or it doesn't happen as often, to try to take some steps forward. And so all four of you are greatly appreciated, and I'm so glad you were part of this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
The link again is gofundme.com/helpthesmithgirls. Rounding out the show, I have Hector Garcia. Hector is a clinical psychologist. He specializes in the treatment of combat-related PTSD. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. And he's an author. He's the author of a book called Alpha God, The Psychology of Religious Violence and Oppression. Dr. Garcia, I kind of wish we were talking about the book, like I wish we were speaking in other circumstances today.
Yes, yeah, very dark times.
I'd like to go back and revisit sort of the angle that you've taken in the book, the psychology of religious violence. I know that's really not the focus tonight, but I'd like to maybe come back and we'll do a broadcast, a conversation together after the new year, if you're game for that.
No, I'd love to. And before we talk today, let me just say that, I do work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, but I'm not here representing the VA or the Department of Defense. This is just me as an individual, as a member of the local secular community. I knew Scott. I didn't know him well, I admit, but I knew him well enough. And I wanted to come on and offer whatever insights I can to help us make sense of what occurred, of what was perpetrated, and to help us recover. So this is just me here.
There's a lot of understandable outrage and anger toward this man. Justifiable anger over this instance of just lethal domestic violence. And I know the danger of speculation here, but how do we approach this issue and these suspicions about a quote-unquote peaceful man, peaceful in the eyes of many anyway, who they suspect might have been anything but peaceful behind closed doors? Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Garcia?
Well, I can't speak to what the relationship was like. I don't know. But you're right. There's a lot of anger and understandable anger. And, I feel like I want to call what's happening as a complex grief response. Although, clinically speaking, complex grief refers to grief that doesn't remit after a period of time. But that's not so much what I'm talking about. I'm referring to just this complex set of emotions that arise in the aftermath of a murder-suicide. Apart from the grief, there's anger. And for friends and family, the shame, the confusion. So many people have said to me personally, or said this on social media, like, I don't know what to feel. What should I feel? There's the experience of emotional numbing as a way to insulate oneself from such an intense and complex set of emotions. And, often the more complex the set of emotions, the more difficult it is to process the loss. So, one thing I want to say is, well, it may help in the short term as a tactic to just survive the day, make arrangements to just make it to the next day. Long term, these emotions have to be expressed, experienced, and so forth. So I'm glad that you're providing a forum to help make that happen.
It's a minefield. I want to make sure that no one ever feels exploited, that we're not sensationalizing this in any way. But if we can't talk about these things, how do we navigate through them? And I felt kind of an obligation as someone who has a platform and a forum that is a forum of communication. Let's try to talk about some of this stuff. The narratives out there, you talked about how complex the feelings are that people have. On one shade, I see people who were talking about, he was a killer, yes, but he was also a very damaged person. Obviously, he must have been to carry this out. And they were sympathetic's not really the word I'm looking for, but in a ways, perhaps, yes, he was a broken person. Something had happened to him. He was damaged in some way that drove him to murder this beautiful woman and leave the children orphans. And they were, they saw him as, yes, a killer, a murderer, yes, but also a victim. And then there's another narrative out there that has zero sympathy and says, screw that guy. He ruined lives. He cheated Jennifer out of her future, out of seeing her kids grow up. Who cares who he was or what he thinks? He's a killer carrying out the worst instance of domestic violence, and they just write him off entirely. Have you noticed any of this, and how would you navigate these very thick waters?
Well, that's speaking exactly to the complexity of emotions that comes from something like this, and you're kind of speaking to both extremes. I think a lot of both sides is true, and it's just so difficult to navigate through those emotions, through those waters. And I've also heard a lot of people link what happened with PTSD in the shooter. And this is something I'd like to talk a bit about, because I think while that comes in part from compassion about veterans suffering, I just want to say emphatically that PTSD does not cause murder. And we're worsening the stigma around PTSD by mistakenly making that connection. I don't know of any literature showing that PTSD is associated with an increase in violence. The other thing is, we mustn't confuse terms and fail to call this what it was, as it was murder, and it was premeditated murder. For that matter, there's a lot of misconceptions about veteran suicide. There's research looking at predictors of suicide among vets has failed to find an association with combat exposure. And, the shooter was a vet. But what has been found is that experiencing childhood traumas prior to entering the military service is a predictor. In fact, one study conducted in 2014 found that veterans are twice as likely to report a history of childhood sexual abuse than civilians. Now, I'm definitely not saying this was the case with the gunman, because I don't know anything about his history.
So if I may stop you there for just a moment, you aren't aware, or you are aware that he had suffered from some form or measure of PTSD?
I am not aware whether he suffered from some measure of PTSD or whether he did not.
Dr. Garcia, can we talk about violence against women?
This is, I think, obviously, very central to what happened. I mean, it's a problem in our society. It's a problem worldwide. I mean, according to the CDC, the Center of Disease Control, more than half of the women murdered, there was a study looking at murders between 2003 and 2014. More than half the women murdered within those 11 years, they were killed by their romantic partners. So it's a problem. And what I write about a lot, Seth, is, evolutionary reasons for this. This issue. Are you familiar with the concept of mate guarding? It's something we see in other primates where females are attacked for interactions with other males, grooming other males, being in the vicinity of other males. And, that impulse carries over to men. And it carries over into our laws, and it carries over into our religions. In Texas, for example, as late as 1974, it was legal for men to kill their wives if they caught them cheating on them. Now, I am not saying that anybody was cheating in this relationship. I don't know. But what I am talking about is how embedded this issue of female sexual control is in our evolved psychology, in our laws, in our religions. We see this in religions and honor killings. And you've probably read the passage in Deuteronomy which says, stone women to death for getting raped and not screaming loudly enough. Are you familiar with that passage?
I am indeed, yeah. If I may stop you there for just a moment, I'm also acutely aware of how the Bible frames women as property, something that belongs to the male. Is that relevant in these cases as well?
It typically is. A lot of murder-suicides like this happen when divorce is presented. It's an old pattern of using violence for sexual control. But I think it's pretty obvious that in what we see here, it's ultimately not about religion. We're talking about somebody who was a pretty vocal atheist here. It's about being male. It's about our evolutionary drives. I think religion makes it worse by sanctifying it. And, this is why I've spoken so vocal. I've been so vocal about any attempts to block the teaching of evolutionary science in public schools, because these sciences tell us the ultimate reason for these kinds of behaviors. And until we fully recognize them for what they are, we can't make better laws, and we can't design prevention strategies that take this knowledge into account.
What's the next move if we are to prevent violence against women, especially by those they are supposed to trust, the people who are their life partners, romantic partners, domestic partners? What's the move?
Well, I think a lot of people wish they had the best answers for that, and I don't know. But what I can tell you is that when we look at societies where women have more power, more economic freedom, more political representation, there's less violence against women. Scandinavia is a good example. A lot of countries in Scandinavia have really low rates of violence against women. And I think we can do a lot better here in many ways. We've got to strive for that in as many ways as we possibly can.
I'm an atheist who came out of the church, and I don't really miss anything about my religion, except perhaps the fact that the church did community so well. And the secular cultures are sometimes, it's like we lack the infrastructure. We've seen this in disaster relief. We've seen this in other instances where, gosh, I wish we had the resources. I wish we had the structure. Hell, I wish we had the practice, of many of these institutions. The church does community. It does support, sometimes in very misguided ways. But from an organizational standpoint, it does it really well. And right. I look at what we are and who we are, and I ask, how can we cultivate a greater sense of community and support for ourselves, for Jennifer's children, and for everybody in need? Your thoughts on this, sir?
Yeah, Seth, I'm right there with you. I couldn't agree more. And what keeps coming to mind is this interview on Bill Maher's film, Religulous. So there's a member of the Mormon Church, and I'm paraphrasing here. He said something like, if we question the veracity of Joseph Smith and his word, his achievements, etc., we will have committed social suicide. That phrase kind of stood out for me. Well, no one wants to jeopardize their social support network. And I think that comes down to who we are as human beings. I talk a lot about how, we evolved as tribalistic peoples, living in small, close-knit groups of people. There's a mountain of evidence that I could delve into maybe at a later time that shows, even though most of us are no longer living these hunter-gatherer lifestyles, our brains are calibrated for these closely knit groups, and we need them. And we form approximation of these tribes. And you're right. I mean, churches are excellent at providing a proxy. But, that being said, it's sad that one has to sacrifice one's intellect to get the support that they need.
There's a fear out there, though, by some who think that coming together for support and community, organizing in this way, is somehow a religious exercise. It's a mantra I'm always saying. Community is done well by the church, but the church doesn't own it. Coming together to support these children and raise funds for them and to hopefully provide some measure, any measure of healing and steps toward some kind of future. This is not religious. This is a humanistic endeavor. And I think that's where I was sort of leaning with that.
Well, I think the secular community, the atheist community, I think we're probably on the natural curve of being individualists. We're probably on the far end of being individualist thinkers. And so we probably do get a little cagey about that kind of thing. But you're right, the churches are really good at providing that emotionally intuitive tribe to come to in times of crisis. And I keep thinking of something that I'll share this with you, something that I sometimes bring up in session. You know how Chinese characters have dual meanings sometimes. They're layered with meaning. Like one character will have several meanings. So the Chinese character for crisis, I'm told, it has dual meaning. It stands for danger and opportunity. So maybe this horrific, tragic, saddening event can help us see how to better come together and to organize and to provide a secular platform to support people. I think, Seth, it starts by doing what we're doing here, coming together and talking about difficult issues, asking difficult questions, which I think this is something that the secular community is especially good at.
Dr. Hector Garcia, his website is hector-garcia.com. I appreciate your time so much and your expertise as well. I'm serious. I think let's try to hook up after the new year. We'll talk about Alpha God, the book, and get into that angle on religious violence and depression. But in the interim, thank you for being here today. Thank you for the work that you do. It means a lot, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that you're lending a voice to the suffering out there and trying to help people come together on this.
We look at all this and, it's not the movies. There isn't going to be a twist ending to this story that's going to make everything right again. We're not always going to find the answers we seek. We might not find any answers we seek, but we can spread love and show compassion and demonstrate goodness and work to shield and protect others and hold in our arms those who are at the lowest point in their lives. And the thoughts and prayers are simply not going to do it. We must do it ourselves. This show is dedicated to the 3 daughters left behind, with my earnest request that you will join me in donating something toward their future, a future that we can only hope will be colored by the fond memory of the vibrant person that was their mother, Jennifer Smith, her love of life, her good humor, her generous heart, her adoration of her children, and the hope that these kids, one day in their own lives, they might someday find their way through these terrible times to live their own very long lives in goodness and in safety and in peace and surrounded by a lot of love. Give something right now. GoFundMe.com/Help the Smith Girls. And thank you so very much for listening.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.